Shattered dreams. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when the creek behind Madeline Foster's cottage finally surrendered to nature's fury. She'd watched the water rise inch by inch throughout the evening, clutching her emergency bag and hoping the levee would hold. At midnight, the rushing water breached her small backyard, then her kitchen, then her entire ground floor. By morning, everything Madeline had built over her 32 years of life was either waterlogged, mud-stained, or floating downstream toward the River Point Valley. "It's just stuff," she whispered to herself, standing on higher ground as emergency services assessed the damage. Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. Just things, not people. But some of those things were irreplaceable. Her grandmother's handwritten recipes, portfolios of student artwork from her years as an art therapist, photographs from college that predated digital backups. Madeline wiped away tears with the sleeve of her raincoat, careful not to let the firefighter documenting the scene notice her moment of weakness. "Miss Foster." The firefighter approached, clipboard in hand. "I'm afraid the structural damage is significant. Foundation's compromised. You won't be able to return until extensive repairs are made, if at all." Madeline nodded, numb to additional bad news. "I understand. Thank you." She checked into the River Point Motor Lodge with her duffel bag of salvaged belongings, a few clothes, her laptop, and her waterproof art supply case. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation, but it was dry, accounted for something. Her phone rang. It was Olivia, her best friend since they'd met in college 15 years ago. "Maddie, I just heard. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine. At the motor lodge. The cottage is." Madeline's voice cracked. "It's pretty much gone." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry."
Right.
"Fly back immediately, but we're in the middle of negotiations in Singapore. Can I send someone? Do you need money?" "No, really." Madeline's phone beeped with another incoming call. "Hold on. It's the community center." She switched calls, hearing the apologetic voice of Director Freeman. "Madeline, I hate to add to your troubles, but the county's pulled our funding for the art therapy program. With the flood damage to the main building, they're consolidating services. I fought for you, but..." Madeline sank onto the bed. "When?" "End of the week. I'm so sorry." She ended the call and returned to Olivia, delivering the update in a hollow voice. "That's it then. Homeless and jobless in the same day. At least it's efficient. Maddie, listen to me. My brother Julian has that huge estate outside of town. The guest house is sitting empty. Let me call him, your brother. It's a reclusive tech genius who barely speaks at family gatherings. No thanks. He's not that bad. Just ... private. Please, Maddie. Just until you figure things out." Before Madeline could protest further, her phone lit up with a third call, the hospital. Her younger brother Thomas had been admitted with complications from his chronic condition. The doctor spoke in measured tones about insurance coverage and extended stays. After ending the call, Madeline stared at the water-stained ceiling, feeling the weight of 3 disasters crushing her chest: her home, her job, her brother's health. When the tears came, they matched the rhythm of the rain still pounding against the window. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Julian will be there in 30 minutes. Please don't be stubborn. Let him help." 28 minutes later, a knock at her door revealed a tall figure in a charcoal gray coat. Julian Montgomery's serious expression hadn't changed since she'd last seen him at Olivia's birthday dinner 2 years ago. His dark hair was shorter now, his jawline sharper, but his eyes, observant and thoughtful, remained the same.
"Madeline,"
he said simply. "I have a car waiting.
Yeah.
The guest house is prepared." She clutched her duffel bag tighter. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't. You helped Olivia through her divorce when I was too busy to be there," he interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "You're not a charity case. You're family. Now please, let me help you the way you helped." Madeline, opened her mouth to refuse again, but the fight had drained from her. Sometimes pride had to yield to practicality. "Just until I find something else," she said, stepping through the doorway into the rain. Julian nodded once, opening. "An umbrella over them both?" "Of course," he replied. Just until then. The reluctant guests, the Montgomery estate sprawled across 30 acres of manicured grounds, complete with an orchard, private lake, and gardens that employed 3 full-time landscapers. As Julian's sleek electric sedan wound up the private drive, Madeline pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, feeling increasingly out of place with each passing second. "The guest house is separate from the main residence," Julian explained, breaking the silence that had settled between them during the drive. "You'll have complete privacy." "I won't be staying long," Madeline reminded him, as much for herself as for him. "Just until the insurance comes through or I find another job?" Julian nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim car interior. "Stay as long as you need." The guest house turned out to be a 2,000-square-foot cottage with vaulted ceilings, floor to ceiling, windows overlooking the lake, and furnishings that belonged in an architectural magazine. Madeline stood in the entryway, clutching her pathetic duffel bag, suddenly aware of the mud on her boots and the disheveled state of her rain-frizzed auburn hair. "This is excessive," she murmured. "It's available," Julian countered simply. He gestured toward the kitchen. "There's food in the refrigerator, toiletries in the bathroom. The Wi-Fi password is on the counter. If you need anything else, Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, comes by on Tuesdays and Fridays." Madeline set her bag down carefully, as if she might accidentally break something worth more than her annual salary. "Thank you, Julian. I mean it. But I need to make sure we're clear. I'm not looking for a handout. I'll find work and pay you rent until I can move out." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Julian's face. "Olivia said you'd say that. Well, she knows me." "She does." He hesitated, then added the north wing of the main house has my office. I generally work from 7 to 7. You won't see much of me." Madeline wasn't sure if that was meant to reassure her or himself. "That's fine. Be busy job hunting anyway." An awkward silence fell between them. Julian checked his watch, a subtle, understated timepiece that probably cost more than a car, and gestured vaguely toward the door. "I'll leave you to settle in." After he left, Madeline explored her temporary home, running her fingers over expensive fabrics and surfaces, feeling like an imposter in someone else's life. The refrigerator was stocked with organic produce, artisanal cheeses, and prepared meals in glass containers with handwritten labels. The closet in the master bedroom was empty except for a plush robe and slippers. The bathroom contained high-end toiletries arranged with meticulous precision. Everything was perfect, personal, and utterly intimidating. Later that night, unable to sleep in the too-soft bed with its 2 high thread count sheets, Madeline wandered to the kitchen for tea. Through the window, she noticed lights still on in the main house. Julian was visible through his office window, hunched over a desk covered in multiple screens, his face illuminated by their blue glow, watching him work. In isolation, she felt an unexpected pang of kinship. They were both alone, just in different ways. The next morning, Madeline woke early and walked the grounds, trying to clear her head and plan her next steps. To her surprise, she found Julian sitting on a bench near the lake, a steaming mug in his hands, staring at the water. "Sorry," she said, turning to leave. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," he replied, his voice softer than she remembered. "This is my morning ritual, coffee by the lake before the day begins." Hesitantly, she sat on the opposite end of the bench. "It's beautiful here." Julian nodded. "Helps me think." They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for several minutes, watching mist rise from the lake's surface. "I called the hospital this morning," Julian said suddenly. "About your brother?" Madeline stiffened. "That's not—" "I didn't do anything," he interrupted. "I just asked questions. Thomas's condition requires specialized care. The River Point Hospital isn't equipped for it. The Freeman Medical Center in the city would be better." "The Freeman Center doesn't take his insurance," Madeline said quietly. Julian sipped his coffee. "I sit on their board. They're always looking for participants in their research programs. The treatment would be covered." Madeline's first instinct was to refuse to reject what felt like charity. But Thomas's face flashed in her mind. Pride wasn't worth his suffering. "I'll look into it," she conceded. Thank you. Julian nodded once, then checked his watch. I have calls starting soon. As he stood to leave, Madeline found herself saying, I make a decent risotto. If you're free tonight, I could cook. Small thanks for. She gestured vaguely at the guest house, the estate, everything. Julian seemed genuinely surprised by the offer. I usually work through dinner. Of course, no problem. He hesitated, then added, but I could take a break. Around 7. 7 works. That evening, Madeline discovered the guest house kitchen was better equipped than most restaurants. Using ingredients from the fridge, she prepared a mushroom risotto with herbs from the garden. Julian arrived precisely at 7, still in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, small concessions to informality that somehow made him seem more human. The conversation started awkwardly, polite inquiries about the guest house and stilted small talk. But somewhere between the risotto and the desserta simple berry compote, Madeline had thrown together something shifted. Julian asked about her art therapy work, and Madeline found herself explaining her techniques with unexpected passion. Bypasses the analytical brain, she explained, gesturing with her fork. It accesses emotions people can't always verbalize, especially children or trauma survivors. Julian listened with genuine interest. That's why you're so upset about losing the program. It wasn't a question, but Madeline nodded anyway. Those kids need consistency. Now they'll have nothing. What would you do differently if you could? Rebuild the program your way? The question surprised her. No one had ever asked what she wanted, only what she could do. Within increasingly tight constraints as she described her vision for an expanded community arts center, Julian asked thoughtful, specific questions. For the first time since the SE flood, Madeline felt a spark of something beyond despair, a reminder of purpose, possibility. When Julian finally checked his watch and excused himself to return to work, Madeline realized 3 hours had passed. She'd seen glimpses of a different man than the distant figure from family gatherings. Someone perceptive, engaged, and surprisingly easy to talk to. Later, washing dishes and staring out at the lights of the main house, Madeline wondered about the reclusive billionaire who had unexpectedly opened his home to her. There was clearly more to Julian Montgomery than she'd assumed despite her determination to maintain emotional distance. She found herself curious to discover what else she might have misjudged. Unexpected connections. 2 weeks into her stay at the Montgomery estate, Madeline had established a routine. Mornings began with a walk around the lake, occasionally intersecting with Julian's coffee ritual.
Wow.
Days were filled with job applications, insurance calls, and hospital visits to Thomas, who had been accepted into the Freeman Center's research program. Evenings alternated between solitary dinners and shared meals with Julian, which had become surprisingly frequent. Tonight, she was sorting through a box of salvaged items from her cottage, mostly water-damaged books and photo albums, when a knock at the guest house door interrupted her. Julian stood on the threshold, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Am I disturbing you? Not at all, Madeline replied, brushing dust from her hands. Just archaeology through my past, he gestured, to a large flat package leaning against the wall. I brought something. For your brother. Curious, Madeline unwrapped the parcel to find a portable easel and a professional-grade art kit: paints, brushes, charcoals, and sketchbooks. You mentioned art therapy helps with chronic pain, Julian explained, his voice matter-of-fact. Thought Thomas might benefit while he's in treatment? Madeline ran her fingers over the brushes, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gift. This is perfect, thank you. Julian nodded, eyes catching on the water-stained photo album on her coffee table. Family photos? What's left of them? Madeline sighed. Most were destroyed in the flood. May I? He asked, gesturing to the album. When she nodded, he sat beside her on the couch, careful to maintain a respectful distance as he turned the warped pages. You were a dancer? He asked, pausing at a photo of teenage Madeline in a ballet costume. For a while, it wasn't quite good. Enough for a career, but it taught me discipline. She smiled at the memory. What about you? What was young Julian Montgomery like before the tech empire? Something in his expression closed off slightly. Focused. Driven. That's not surprising, Madeline said, turning another page. But there must have been something else. Hobbies. Friends. First love. Julian was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. I built things. Mechanical puzzles, small robots, eventually software. While other kids were at parties, I was in my room coding. Olivia was the social one. That explains why she adopted me immediately in college, Madeline said with a laugh. I was the awkward art major who'd rather paint than party. Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. Olivia described you differently. The adventurous one, who dragged. Her hiking and 2 poetry slams. Well, I contained multitudes, she said with a wry smile. Still do, I hope. The conversation flowed more easily after that, weaving through memories and observations. Julian revealed that his parents' high expectations had shaped his driven nature. While his sister's outgoing personality had often left him feeling overlooked, Madeline shared stories of growing up with a chronically ill sibling. Learning early about responsibility and the fragility of plans. Is that why you became an art therapist? Julian asked. Because of Thomas? Partly, Madeline admitted. I saw how art gave him control when his body wouldn't cooperate. But it was also selfish. I wanted work that felt meaningful. That's not selfish, Julian said quietly. It's human. The evening stretched longer than either intended. When Julian finally rose to leave, he hesitated by the door. I have an early conference call with Tokyo tomorrow, but there's a gallery opening in the city Thursday evening. New artists focusing on community engagement, if you're interested. The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken implications. I'd like that, Madeline said simply. Thursday evening found them walking through a converted warehouse space, surrounded by multimedia installations addressing urban renewal. Julian seemed different outside the estate, still reserved but less guarded. Several attendees recognized him, expressions registering surprise at his presence at such a public event. You don't do this often, Madeline observed as they examined. A sculpture made from reclaimed materials. 10 gallery openings. Julian smiled slightly. No, I usually send representatives to cultural events. Why make an exception tonight? His eyes met hers. Good company. The simple answer warmed her more than it should have. Later, over dinner at a small restaurant where Julian seemed to know the chef personally, he asked about her job search. 3 rejections this week, Madeline admitted. Art programs are always the first cut when budgets tighten. Julian considered her over his wine glass. What if you created your own program that requires funding, space, connections, none of which I have right now? But if you did, Madeline found herself outlining her dream: a community arts center, serving all ages, integrating therapy with education and expression. Julian asked detailed questions about logistics, costs, potential partnerships. She assumed it was polite conversation until he pulled out his phone and began taking notes. What are you doing? Research, he replied cryptically. The following week brought a surprising invitation. Julian's company was hosting a charity gala for educational initiatives, and he asked Madeline to attend as his guest. I don't exactly have gala attire in my flood-salvaged wardrobe, she pointed out. Olivia's stylist can help, he offered, then quickly added, or not. I shouldn't presume. His rare moment of uncertainty made Madeline smile. Can find something suitable. But why invite me? There will be people there interested in community development, potential connections for your arts center idea. Madeline studied him carefully. You're serious about that? I recognize a good investment when I see one, Julian said simply. The night of the gala, Madeline wore a midnight blue dress she'd found at a consignment shop. Her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo. Julian's expression when she descended the guest house steps told her the effort had been worthwhile. Throughout the evening, Julian introduced her to foundation directors, philanthropists, and education advocates, always framing her ideas with subtle endorsement. By midnight, Madeline had collected business cards, tentative interest, and a growing sense of possibility. You didn't have to do all this, she told him as they rode home in his car. I wanted to, he replied. Then, after a pause, my brother died when I was 12. The non sequitur caught Madeline off guard. I didn't know. Few people do. He had leukemia. Before he died, an art therapist helped him express things he couldn't say. Julian kept his eyes on the road. When you talked about your work, I remembered. Understanding dawned. That's why you've been helping me. Initially, perhaps, Julian admitted. But now, ... He fell silent. Seemingly unable to complete the thought, Madeline reached across the center console and briefly covered his hand with hers. Thank you for telling me. The next morning, Madeline found Julian at their bench by the lake, earlier than usual. His expression was troubled. Everything okay? She asked, joining him. My parents are coming for dinner tonight, he said, staring at the water. It's complicated. Family often is, Madeline said carefully. Should I make myself scarce? Turned to her, surprising her with the intensity in his gaze. Actually, I was hoping you'd join us. They can be critical, and having someone else there might buffer things. The request revealed more vulnerability than anything he'd said before. This powerful, self-contained man was asking for her support. Of course, she said without hesitation. What time should I arrive? That evening revealed sides of Julian she hadn't seen before, the dutiful son seeking approval from his elegant, reserved mother and his accomplished, demanding father. Throughout dinner, Madeline watched him navigate their subtle critiques and pointed questions about business decisions. When his father dismissed Julian's recent education initiative as impractical charity, Madeline found herself intervening. Actually, I've seen the impact of similar programs firsthand, she said, meeting the elder Montgomery's skeptical gaze. They build skills that traditional education often misses, especially for disadvantaged students. Julian's mother raised an eyebrow. And you're an expert on education, Miss Foster? It's on witnessing transformation through art and expression? Yes, Madeline replied evenly. Your son understands the value of investing in people, not just products. Flicker of surprise and perhaps respect crossed Julian's father's face. The conversation shifted, and the evening continued with slightly less tension. Later, after his parents had departed, Julian found Madeline in the kitchen, washing dishes despite the staff's protests. You didn't have to defend me, he said quietly. Wasn't defending you, Madeline countered. I was stating facts. Your parents don't see what I see? And what do you see? Their eyes met, the question hanging between them. Someone who hides his compassion behind efficiency, she said softly. Someone who listens more than he speaks. Someone worth knowing. Julian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. For a breathless moment, Madeline thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Thank you, he murmured, for seeing. As he turned to leave, Madeline realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had begun as reluctant charity had evolved into something. Neither of them had anticipated a connection that defied simple categorization, built on mutual recognition of the person beneath the surface. And it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. Crossroads the Freeman. Medical Center's atrium filled with golden afternoon light as Madeline watched Thomas demonstrate his latest art project to a group of fellow patients. 3 months of experimental treatment had brought remarkable improvement. He stood straighter, smiled more easily, moved with less pain. Beside her, Julian observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. He has talent, Julian remarked, nodding. Toward Thomas's vibrant canvas, runs in the family. Along with stubbornness, Madeline replied with a smile. He's talking about going back to school next semester. That's excellent news. Madeline turned to face him fully. I know what strings you pulled to get him into this program, Julian. I can never repay that. I didn't do it expecting repayment, he said simply. They walked through the hospital gardens, their shoulders occasionally brushing in and out familiar. Rhythm of proximity and distance that had defined their relationship over the past months. Neither had put words to the tension that hummed between them, though it had grown increasingly difficult to ignore. I received an interesting email this morning, Madeline said as they reached a stone bench overlooking a small pond. From the Harrington Foundation. Julian's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. Oh, they're funding a pilot program for community arts integration. They want me to lead it. She watched him carefully. Funny thing is, I never applied. Someone nominated me. The foundation has excellent taste, Julian replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Julian. She touched his arm. Did you do this? I mentioned your qualifications to some board members, he admitted. The decision was entirely theirs. Madeline absorbed this information, conflicted emotions washing through her. Pride in the recognition, gratitude for his belief in her, and something else, a nagging concern that had grown as her feelings for Julian deepened. The program sounds perfect, Julian continued when she remained silent. Everything you described wanting to create. It is perfect, Madeline agreed, except for one detail they mentioned during the call. She took a deep breath. It's in Barcelona, for a year. Julian went very still. I see. They want someone to establish a model they can replicate internationally. It's an incredible opportunity. You should take it, he said without hesitation. Madeline studied his face, searching for any hint of what he truly felt. Just like that? Your talent shouldn't be limited to one community, Julian said, his voice measured and calm. This is the recognition you deserve. Something inside Madeline deflated at his pragmatic response. What had she expected? Dramatic declaration? A request for her to stay? That wasn't who Julian was. I haven't decided yet, she said, rising from the bench. It's a big change. Julian stood as well, maintaining the careful distance between them. When would you leave? 3 weeks, if I accept. She forced a smile. Plenty of time to find another tenant for your guest house. The guest house is yours for as long as you want it, Julian said softly. Even empty. The drive back to the estate passed in contemplative silence. As they turned up the private road, Madeline caught sight of an unfamiliar car parked near the main house. Olivia's back, Julian explained, his expression brightening. Slightly. She finished her Singapore project early. Olivia Montgomery burst from the front door as they approached. Her designer sunglasses perched atop her sleek bob, arms outstretched for hugs. Surprise, I escaped corporate purgatory. Madeline laughed as her friend embraced her tightly, then watched as Olivia hugged her brother with equal enthusiasm. The siblings' contrasting personalities had always fascinated her. Olivia, all expressive. Warmth to Julian's contained reserve, yet their bond was undeniable. You two look cozy, Olivia observed, with a knowing smile. Have you been playing nice while I was gone? Julian's been incredibly generous, Madeline replied carefully. Helen? Received an offer from the Harrington Foundation, Julian interjected. A significant opportunity in Barcelona. Olivia's eyebrows shot up. Barcelona? That's huge. Though I just got back and now you're leaving? She pouted theatrically. What about our wine nights? I haven't accepted yet, Madeline clarified. Oh. We need to discuss this properly, Olivia declared. Over dinner? I'll cook. You don't cook, Julian pointed out. I'll order in while pretending to cook. Same result. Less fire risk. That evening, over takeout from Madeline's favorite Italian restaurant, Olivia regaled them with tales from Singapore, while simultaneously extracting details about their lives during her absence. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, not the easy familiarity between them, nor the underlying tension. After Julian excused himself to take a business call, Olivia leaned forward conspiratorially. Okay, Spill, what's happening between you two? Nothing's happening, Madeline insisted. He's been kind. That's all kind? Olivia repeated incredulously. My brother doesn't do kind without reason. He barely left his office before you moved in, and now he's attending gallery openings and hospital visits. She shook her head. He cares about you, Maddie, as a friend, Madeline clarified. And even if there were more, this Barcelona opportunity is exactly what I've worked toward. I can't pass it up for... But, she trailed off, unable to name what might exist between her and Julian. For potential, Olivia suggested gently. No, you probably shouldn't. But you should at least talk about it. Julian won't initiate that conversation. He's pathologically afraid of imposing his feelings on others. Before Madeline could respond, Julian returned. The moment for candor passed, replaced by lighter conversation and careful avoidance of the future that loomed before them. Days slipped by with the Barcelona decision hanging unresolved between them. Julian threw himself into work, spending longer hours in his office. Madeline divided her time between preparing Thomas for her potential departure and sketching preliminary ideas for the Harrington program. One evening, a week before her decision, deadline, Madeline found herself restless and drawn to the main house. Though she rarely ventured inside, something compelled her to seek Julian out. Following Olivia's directions, she navigated the minimalist halls to his private study. The door stood slightly ajar. Inside, Julian sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, the Barcelona arrangements are complete," he was saying. "Miss Foster will have an apartment near the cultural district. Transportation, everything she needs." Pause. "It's the least I can do. She deserves this opportunity." Madeline stepped back, a curious hollowness spreading through her chest. Had already arranged for her departure, assuming her decision, it's making it easier for her to leave. She returned to the guest house, emotions churning. Was this confirmation that Julian wanted a clean break? Or was he, as always, simply anticipating needs and solving problems? The ambiguity that had once seemed comfortable now felt unbearable. The next morning, Madeline accepted the Barcelona position. She informed Julian over their morning coffee by the lake, watching his face for any reaction beyond polite support. There was a flicker, something pained crossing his features before disappearing beneath his usual composure. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "They made the right choice." "Thank you," Madeline replied, waiting for something more. When nothing came, she added, "I've appreciated everything you've done, Julian, more than I can express." He nodded once. "It's the foundation will arrange your travel, but if you need anything else... I heard," she interrupted, unable to keep a hint of hurt from her voice, "about the apartment, the arrangements. You've been very thorough." Julian looked momentarily confused. "I wanted to ensure you wouldn't have practical concerns, of course." Madeline stood, suddenly needing distance. Always practical. The week that followed held a strange quality of ending and suspension. Madeline packed her few possessions and acquired necessities for Barcelona. Julian maintained his supportive distance, offering assistance without emotion. Olivia watched them both with increasing frustration. 2 days before Madeline's scheduled departure, Olivia cornered her brother. In his office, "You're really going to let her leave without saying anything?" she demanded, hands on hips. Julian looked up from his computer, expression guarded. "Madeline has earned this opportunity." "My feelings are irrelevant," Olivia repeated. Incredulously, "Julian, you've changed since she's been here." You smile. You leave your office. You attend family dinners without checking your watch every 5 minutes. "Correlation doesn't imply causation," he replied stiffly. "Oh, stop hiding behind that analytical brain of yours." Olivia threw up her hands. "You're in love with her. And from what I can see, she might feel the same. But she's leaving because she thinks you want her to go." Julian's composure faltered. "That's not it is," Olivia insisted. "You're so busy making practical arrangements that you haven't once asked her to consider staying. Not because you want to control her choices, but because you want to be part of them." She softened, approaching his desk. "Julian, I know you think you're being noble by not complicating her decision. But people deserve to make informed choices. Right now, she doesn't know what she'd be leaving behind." After Olivia left, Julian remained motionless at his desk, her words echoing in his mind. The prospect of articulating his feelings, of making himself vulnerable to rejection, terrified him more than any business risk he'd ever taken. Yet the alternative, watching Madeline leave without knowing the truth, seemed suddenly unbearable. The evening before her departure, Madeline stood on the guesthouse porch, watching her last sunset over the lake. A familiar figure approached along the path. Julian, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I join you?" he asked. Madeline nodded, making room on the steps. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching golden light play across the water. "I have something for you," Julian finally said, producing a small package. A going-away gift. Inside the simple wrapping, Madeline found a leather-bound sketchbook. Opening it, she gasped softly. The first pages contained meticulously restored versions of her flood-damaged family photographs, carefully preserved and protected. "How did you digital restoration?" Julian explained. "I found a specialist who could recover what seemed lost." Madeline traced the images with trembling fingers: her parents' wedding, Thomas's childhood birthday parties, her dance recitals. Memories, she thought, had been washed away forever. "Julian, this is ... double quotes words," failed her. "Here's something else," he said quietly. "Something I should have told you sooner." Madeline looked up, meeting his gaze, seeing vulnerability there she'd never witnessed before. Whatever came next would change everything between them. The question was how. Asterisk new horizons, the evening air hung still around them, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Julian's eyes, usually so controlled and unreadable, now revealed a depth of emotion that made Madeline's heart quicken. "I don't want you to go," he said simply. The words themselves were straightforward, but coming from Julian, a man who measured every syllable, who rarely expressed personal desires, they carried the weight of confession. "Julian," he held up a hand, a silent request to continue. "I need to say this properly. Once," he took a deep breath, "when you came here, I thought I was helping Olivia's friend through a difficult time. I thought it would be temporary, uncomplicated. I was wrong," he gestured toward the estate, the lake, the grounds they'd walked together. "Before you, this was just a place I owned. Now, ... His voice softened. "Now I notice the way light changes throughout the day. I hear birdsong in the morning. I look forward to conversations instead of just meetings." Madeline sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break this rare moment of complete openness. "I've made arrangements for Barcelona because that's what I do: solve problems, create systems, anticipate needs. But I failed to tell you the most essential truth." Julian turned to face her fully. "These past months with you have been the most alive I've felt since childhood. The thought of returning to life before you arrived is ... unbearable." Madeline's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "'Cause your dreams matter," he replied, without hesitation. "'Cause I've watched you fight to rebuild your life on your own terms. The last thing I wanted was to become another circumstance controlling your choices." The sincerity in his voice undid her. This wasn't the calculated gesture of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. This was Julian private, thoughtful Julian, laying his heart bare with no expectation of reciprocation. "I'm not asking you to stay," he continued quietly. "I'm only asking you to know the truth before you go. That you've changed me. That I..." He hesitated, then finished simply, "that I love you." The words hung between them, transformative in their honesty. Madeline reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. "I convinced myself that what I felt was gratitude, that someone like you couldn't possibly see me as anything but a responsibility." "Never," Julian said firmly. "Not for a moment." "I've spent my life helping others find their voice," Madeline said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I've been afraid to listen to my own. Afraid to admit that somewhere between reluctant acceptance and genuine friendship, I fell in love. With you two." The tension in Julian's shoulders eased slightly. "Then why accept Barcelona without discussing it?" "Because I heard you on the phone making all those arrangements. I thought you were creating a graceful exit for both of us." Look of understanding crossed Julian's face. "I was trying to support your dream, not push you toward it. And I was trying to spare us both the pain of acknowledging what seemed impossible," Madeline admitted. Julian brushed a tear from her cheek with gentle fingers. "We've been protecting each other from the wrong things." Madeline leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "So what happens now?" "That depends," Julian replied softly. "Barcelona is still an extraordinary opportunity. I would never ask you to sacrifice it." Madeline pulled back slightly, studying his face. "Is there no middle ground? No path where? I don't have to choose between the work I love and work." She hesitated. "And you?" Something shifted in Julian's expression, the familiar look he got when approaching a complex problem. "Perhaps there is." The following morning, Madeline postponed. Her departure with a call to the Harrington Foundation. She explained that she needed 2 weeks to reconsider the terms of her commitment, not rejecting the opportunity, but seeking flexibility within it. Those 2 weeks transformed everything. Julian revealed that his company had been developing a digital platform for arts education, a project born partly from their conversations about accessibility. The Harrington Foundation, intrigued by the potential partnership, agreed to modify their offer. Madeline would spend 3 months in Barcelona establishing the program, then continue as a remote director, traveling quarterly while developing a parallel initiative in River Point. It's not a perfect solution, Julian acknowledged as they reviewed the revised proposal. There will be challenges, separation, complications. Nothing worthwhile comes easily, Madeline replied, squeezing his hand. What matters is that we're both committed to making it work. The night before her rescheduled departure for Barcelona, they hosted a small gathering at the main house. Thomas, now well enough to live independently again, raised a toast. To my sister, who taught me that art can heal more than medicine alone, he said, eyes bright with pride. And to Julian, who saw her value when others missed it, Livia beaming. With self-satisfaction at her matchmaking success, added her own toast to taking chances on unexpected connections. Later, as guests departed, Julian led Madeline to his study, a space she'd rarely entered. On his desk sat architectural plans she hadn't seen before. "What's this?" she asked, examining the detailed drawings. "The old community center property," Julian explained. "I acquired it last month." Madeline looked up in surprise. "Without telling me?" "I wanted to be sure it was viable first," he said. Pointing to structural annotations, the flood damage was significant, but not irreparable. With proper renovation, it could become the arts center you envisioned, connected to the international program, but serving local needs. Madeline traced the drawings with wondering fingers. "Julian, this is ... a beginning," he finished for her.
Bag.
Something to come home to. The word home resonated between them. No longer the guest house, not the main estate, but something they would build together. 3 months later, Madeline stood in a sun-drenched studio in Barcelona, surrounded by children creating vibrant murals under her guidance. The program had exceeded expectations, drawing attention from educational institutions across Europe. Through daily video calls, she shared developments with Julian, who integrated them into the digital platform taking shape back home. When she returned to River Point for the groundbreaking ceremony of the new arts center, Julian met her at the airport, their reunion suite, despite the brevity of their separation. Together, they had discovered that distance could strengthen connection when built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The following spring, as cherry blossoms drifted across the lake at the Montgomery estate, Julian and Madeline stood hand in hand on the shore where they had first begun their morning conversations. "I have a question," Julian said, uncharacteristic nervousness in his voice, "about partnership." Madeline smiled, recognizing the careful phrasing for what it was. "A business partnership, life partnership," he clarified, producing a small box from his pocket. "I'm not asking because of what we've built together or what we might build in the future.
No, I'm asking
Because every day with you makes me better than I was before." Tears blurred Madeline's vision as he opened the box to reveal a ring elegant and understated, perfectly suited to her. "You once told me that art bypasses the analytical brain and accesses deeper truth," he said softly. "You are that truth for me, Madeline. The evidence that life can be both meaningful and beautiful." She took his face in her hands, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that rainy night when he'd appeared at her motel door. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, to partnership. Yes, to building something lasting. Yes, to you."
1 year.
Later, the River Point Community Arts Center opened its doors. Children from the neighborhood filled bright studios. Seniors attended workshops alongside young professionals. Thomas led a program for chronic pain patients. The digital platform Julian had developed connected them with similar centers around the world, including the thriving Barcelona program. On opening day, Madeline and Julian stood back, watching the community fill the space that had once been destroyed by floodwaters. When everything fell apart that night, Madeline mused, I never imagined it would lead here. Julian's arm tightened around her waist. That's the curious thing about devastation, he replied. It clears space for rebuilding. A young girl approached them, offering a painting still wet with vibrant colors. For you, she said shyly. It's the two of you. The canvas showed two figures by a lake, surrounded by light simple in execution, but profound in meaning. Julian accepted it with the solemnity such gifts deserved. Thank you, he said. We'll treasure it. As the child ran back to her friends, Madeline leaned her head against Julian's shoulder. It's not bad for two people who once thought they had nothing in common. We had the most important things in common, Julian corrected gently. Courage to begin again, willingness to see beyond. Surfaces, capacity for growth. They had built something neither could have created alone, not just the center or their programs, but a life where purpose and love reinforced each other. What had begun in crisis had transformed into choice, intention, and shared vision. That evening, they returned to their bench by the lake, now weathered by seasons, but sturdy in its foundations. The setting sun painted the water gold, much like that first morning they had sat together in tentative silence. Do you ever think about how differently things might have gone? Madeline asked, her head resting against Julian's shoulder. Lou, the flood hadn't happened. If Olivia had been home that night instead of you. Julian considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. I believe some connections are inevitable, he said finally. They might take different paths, different timelines, but certain people are meant to find each other. The analytical businessman believes in destiny? Madeline teased gently. I believe in patterns, Julian clarified, a smile warming his voice. In variables that, when aligned correctly, produce extraordinary results. He brushed his lips against her temple. And I believe that losing everything sometimes clears the way for finding what matters most. As darkness settled over the lake and lights began to twinkle in windows across the estate, they remained together on their bench, no longer reluctant guest and reserved host, but partners who had discovered that life's most profound rebuilding happens not in structures of wood and stone, but in the human heart's capacity for new beginnings.